night my father threw a glass of scotch at the wall 3 inches from my head, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. I was wrong. My name is Ivy. Ivy Sherwood. Or at least, that's what I'd been told my whole life. I was 31 years old, working as a pediatric nurse at St. Luke's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, living in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like old radiator heat and my neighbor's cooking. I drove a 2017 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror I kept meaning to fix. I had $200 in my savings account and a cat named Biscuit who knocked things off the counter at 2 in the morning. I was ordinary, I was nobody. And I was about to find out that every single thing I believed about who I was, had been a lie. It started with my grandmother's will. My grandmother, Loretta Sherwood, died in March of that year. She was 84, sharp until the very end, and she smelled like Chanel No. 5 and peppermints. She was the one person in my family who ever looked at me like I mattered. When she called me into her hospital room 2 weeks before she died and held my hand and said, "Ivy, the truth always finds its way out eventually," I thought she was just being philosophical. Old people said things like that. I didn't understand yet that she was warning me. The will reading was scheduled for a Saturday morning in April. My father, I'll call him my father because that's what I called him for 31 years, even though the word now tastes like ash, held the reading at the family estate outside Dublin, Ohio. A house with 6 bedrooms, a circular driveway, and a gate that opened with a code I'd never been given. I always had to buzz in. That should have told me something. My father's name is Leonard Sherwood. He built his money in commercial real estate over 30 years, and he carried that money the way some men carry a gun, always visible, always a little threatening. He had 2 children by his first wife, who died when I was 12. My older brother, Connor, who could do no wrong, and me. I'd spent my entire life trying to understand why my father looked at Connor like he hung the moon and looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. Connor got the car on his 16th birthday. I got a lecture about earning things. Connor got his college tuition paid in full. I took out $67,000 in student loans. Connor could walk into a room and my father's whole face would change, open up, soften. When I walked in, something in him would close. I asked him once, when I was 19 and brave enough to say it out loud. We were in the kitchen. He was pouring coffee. I said, "Dad, do you even like me?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Don't be dramatic, Ivy." That was it. So I learned to need nothing from him. I became a nurse because I wanted to take care of people who actually needed me. I built a small, quiet life. I called him on holidays. I showed up when I was supposed to. I stopped wanting anything. Until the will reading. There were 8 of us in the living room that morning. My father at the head of the room, standing like it was a board meeting. Connor beside him, already looking pleased with himself. My father's second wife, a woman named Sylvia, who I'd never fully trusted and never fully understood why. The family attorney, a man named Mr. Whitfield, reading from a leather folder. My grandmother's estate was substantial. The house in Florida, investments, art. A total of roughly $3.2 million. Mr. Whitfield read through the distribution carefully. Connor received the majority. Sylvia received the jewelry. Various cousins and extended family received smaller amounts. He got to my name near the end. To my granddaughter Ivy, he read, "I leave the sum of $420,000, along with the contents of the safety deposit box held at First Merit Bank, branch located on High Street in Columbus." $420,000. I couldn't breathe. That was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. That was life-changing. I felt my eyes fill up before I could stop them. And then my father stood up. "That's not happening," he said. The room went quiet in a way that rooms only go quiet when something is about to go very wrong. Mr. Whitfield looked up from his papers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sherwood. My mother was not in her right mind at the end," my father said, his voice completely level, completely controlled. "She had dementia. Everyone in this room knows that. Whatever she signed in those final weeks is going to be contested." "She did not have dementia," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. She knew exactly what she was doing. He turned and looked at me then. Really looked at me, and the expression on his face. I'd never seen anything like it. Not anger. Worse than anger. Something cold and cornered, like an animal that doesn't want you to know it's afraid. You don't get to speak right now, he said. She's your daughter, Leonard, Sylvia said quietly. I was surprised she said anything at all. Stay out of this. He walked toward me. And I don't know what I was expecting. Not what happened. In front of his attorney, in front of his son, in front of everyone, he pointed his finger in my face and said, "You have been a problem in this family since the day you arrived. You are not getting a single dollar of my mother's money. Are we clear? Since the day you arrived." I've replayed those words 1,000 times since then. At the time, I thought it was just cruelty. I thought he meant since the day I was born. I didn't know yet what he actually meant. I left the house without saying another word. I sat in my Honda in the driveway for 11 minutes, shaking too hard to drive. Then I drove home. I fed Biscuit. I sat on my bathroom floor and cried until I had nothing left. Then I washed my face, changed my scrubs, and went to work a double shift because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. On the third morning after the will reading, I was getting ready for work when my phone rang. Columbus area code number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Is this Ivy Sherwood? A woman's voice. Professional, calm. Yes. My name is Patricia Delaney. I'm a private investigator based here in Columbus. I've been hired by a client to locate you, and I'd like to meet with you in person if possible. I understand this may feel unexpected, and I want to assure you, this is not about any legal trouble for you. It's the opposite, actually. I sat down on my couch. Biscuit jumped up next to me. Who hired you? I asked. His name is Robert Callahan. He lives in Portland, Oregon. He's been looking for someone for a very long time, Miss Sherwood. She paused. He believes you may be his daughter. The apartment went very, very still. That's not possible, I said. I know how that sounds, she said, but I'd like to show you some things. Would you be willing to meet? We met the next day at a coffee shop on 5th Avenue. Patricia Delaney was in her 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of steady, no-nonsense energy I recognized from charge nurses. She had a manila folder on the table in front of her. She didn't ease into it. She slid a photograph across the table. It was a baby, a girl, maybe 6 months old, with a tiny tuft of dark hair and wide, pale gray eyes. My eyes are pale gray. My father's were dark brown. My mother's had been hazel. I'd always been told I was a throwback to some distant relative. This is a photo from a missing persons file, Patricia said. Filed June 14, 1993. A baby girl, 6 months old, reported missing from Portland, Oregon. Her name at the time of disappearance was Fiona Callahan. I was born, or so I'd always been told, in June of 1993. Her biological father is Robert Callahan, Patricia continued. He was 28 at the time. His wife had died from complications after childbirth. He was a single father, and one morning he dropped his daughter at a daycare center and she was gone. The daycare worker on duty that day, she slid another paper across, was a woman named Sandra Holt. She waited. My mother's name was Sandra, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Sandra Sherwood. She died when I was 12. Sandra Holt became Sandra Sherwood when she married Leonard Sherwood in October of 1993, Patricia said quietly. 4 months after Fiona Callahan disappeared. The coffee shop noise, the espresso machine, the music, the conversations around us, all of it became a distant hum. She took her, I said. It wasn't a question. The investigation at the time went cold. Robert Callahan never stopped looking, but without leads, without the internet the way it is now, it was nearly impossible. He hired investigators over the years. 2 years ago, he submitted to a DNA database, 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, hoping for a match. Patricia folded her hands on the table. 3 months ago, a partial match came through. It led his current investigator to Columbus. To St. Luke's Medical Center, actually. To a pediatric nurse named Ivy Sherwood. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her holding my hand in that hospital room. The truth always finds its way out eventually. She knew. She'd known something. Maybe not everything, but something. And she'd left me that money, and whatever was in that safety deposit box, because she wanted to make sure I had resources when the truth arrived. Does he want to meet me? I asked. He's been on a plane since yesterday, Patricia said. He lands at Port Columbus in 3 hours. I called out of my afternoon shift. I don't remember the drive home. I remember standing in my bathroom looking at my own face in the mirror. The gray eyes. The way my jaw is slightly too square for my face. The nose I'd always thought looked nothing like anyone in my family. And feeling like the floor was dropping away beneath me. I was not Ivy Sherwood. I was Fiona Callahan. I had been taken from my father when I was 6 months old by a woman I believed was my mother, raised under a name that wasn't mine, by a man who had known for 31 years that I wasn't his child and had treated me with cruelty and contempt for every single day of it. Since the day you arrived. He had always known. I sat on my kitchen floor next to Biscuit and I didn't cry this time. I was past crying. I felt something colder and cleaner than tears. I felt the specific, clarifying sensation of suddenly understanding everything. Robert Callahan was nothing like I expected. I'd imagined someone imposing, some presence that would announce itself. He was medium height, 59 years old, with silver hair and the kind of hands that had clearly done physical work. He'd built a contracting business in Portland over 30 years. He looked like someone who showed up and did what needed to be done. He looked, I realized slowly, a little like me. The jaw, the gray eyes, the slight awkwardness with his hands when he didn't know what to do with himself. We met at Patricia's office. He stood up when I walked in and immediately sat back down, like he wasn't sure of the protocol for meeting the daughter you'd spent 31 years searching for. He started, stopped. His voice was rough. I'm sorry. I've thought about this moment for 30 years and now I don't know what to say. Me neither, I said. We sat across from each other for a long moment. I never stopped, he said. I want you to know that. There was not a single year I gave up. Something cracked open in my chest. I'd been bracing for so long. Against my father's indifference, against feeling unwanted, against being the person nobody fought for. And here was this man I'd never met telling me he'd spent 31 years refusing to stop looking for me. I have a box, he said, and his voice broke on it. At home, I have every birthday card I bought for you every year since you were 1. I never sent them anywhere because I didn't know where you were, but I bought them every year. I have 30 years of birthday cards sitting in a box in my closet. I pressed my hand to my mouth. He said, I know this is a lot. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that you were looked for. That you were wanted. That somebody out there, he pressed his fist against his chest, was never okay with you being gone. I was crying by then. Not the defeated crying from my bathroom floor. Something else. Like something long calcified starting to move. I had a cat, I said, because it was the only thing I could think of. I named him Biscuit. He laughed. A real laugh, sudden and surprised. That's a great name for a cat. He's terrible, I said. He bites. I have a dog. She's also terrible. Eats shoes exclusively. And just like that, in Patricia Delaney's office in Columbus, Ohio, my father and I started talking. The legal process moved faster than I expected. The DNA tests confirmed everything within 2 weeks. Robert's attorney and Patricia had already compiled years of investigative work, and with the DNA results, the case against Leonard Sherwood became something the Columbus DA's office took seriously very quickly. My mother, Sandra, had died 12 years ago, so she couldn't face charges. But my father had known. He had knowingly harbored a kidnapped child, had knowingly participated in the concealment of a federal crime for over 3 decades. His attorney tried everything. He claimed he hadn't known when he married Sandra. He claimed he'd only found out later and been afraid. But there were records, emails from 10 years ago when my father had hired his own private investigator, not to find the truth, but to make sure the truth would never be found. He'd been monitoring Robert's search. He'd known Robert was getting closer. That's what the will reading had really been, a final move to cut me off before everything collapsed, to make sure I had nothing. Instead, it accelerated everything. Connor, to his credit, had genuinely not known. I believe that. The way he called me, shaking, horrified, apologizing over and over, I believe he had no idea. He was my mother's son from before. He'd grown up in that house with me and assumed we were siblings. His shock seemed real. I haven't sorted out yet what he is to me now. That's still a conversation we're having slowly, carefully, in pieces. Sylvia, my father's second wife, actually came forward voluntarily. She told investigators she'd suspected something for years. She didn't know the specifics, but she'd known there was a secret. She said she tried to intervene the day of the will reading because she'd never seen Leonard look at me the way he looked at me that day, cornered and cold and afraid. She said something about it had always felt wrong. My father was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I know because Robert called me and I watched the news coverage in my apartment with Biscuit in my lap, and I felt nothing like I expected to feel. Not triumphant, not happy. Something quieter. Something like the moment at the end of a very long shift when you finally sit down and realize how tired you actually are. It was over. And I was still here. My grandmother's safety deposit box had been on my mind since the will reading. I finally went to the bank 5 weeks after everything came out. I needed a court order to access it because my father had contested the will, but once the nature of the case became public, the contest was dropped very quickly. Inside the box were 3 things. A photograph of me as a baby. Not the Sherwood family photos I'd grown up with, but an earlier one. A baby with a tiny hospital bracelet on her wrist that said, Callahan. My grandmother must have found it somewhere in the house, kept it hidden. A letter in my grandmother's handwriting addressed to me, and a separate envelope containing documentation of a trust she'd set up 5 years earlier. Not the $420,000 from the will. Something different. A separate trust, carefully and quietly established, that she had funded over years without Leonard knowing. The total value was $1.1 million. She had known more than I realized. She had known something was deeply, fundamentally wrong about how her son treated me, even if she hadn't known the full truth. And she had spent 5 years quietly building me a safety net, brick by brick, so that when the truth finally arrived, I would not fall through the floor. I read her letters sitting in my car in the bank parking lot. I won't share all of it, some things are only yours. But she wrote, I don't know what happened. I only know what I see. And what I have always seen is a girl who deserved far more love than she received in this house. Whatever comes next, Ivy, whatever the truth turns out to be, I want you to be free. That is all I have ever wanted for you. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. Robert flew back to Portland a few days after the DNA results came through, but we talked every night. Long calls, 2 or 3 hours, filling in 31 years of gaps. He told me about my biological mother, Claire, who had died from a postpartum embolism 6 months after I was born. He told me about the day he'd taken me to daycare and come back to find me gone. He told me what the next few months had looked like. The investigation, the desperate searching, the wait. Everyone eventually told him it was time to accept it. I never accepted it, he said. I want to be clear about that. I never accepted it. He had a sister, my aunt, named Deborah, who lived in Bend, Oregon and had 2 kids in college. He had an older brother in Seattle. A whole family I'd never known existed who had heard my name, Fiona, spoken at every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering for 30 years, people who had left a chair empty at the table. I went to Portland in July. I flew for the first time in 6 years. Robert picked me up at PDX in a pickup truck with a golden retriever named Penny in the back seat. Penny immediately put her head in my lap and drooled on my jeans. She does that to everyone, Robert said. I love her, I said. Deborah had cooked enough food for 30 people. She hugged me at the door for so long neither of us said anything. Her kids. My cousins, I kept having to remind myself, my cousins, were sweet and awkward and tried very hard not to stare. I slept in a guest room that Robert had clearly spent real effort on, with fresh flowers on the nightstand and new towels still folded with the tags cut off. It was the specific thoughtfulness of someone who had thought about this moment for a very long time. I lay in that bed on the first night and looked at the ceiling and tried to locate myself. Ivy Sherwood, pediatric nurse, Columbus, Ohio. Fiona Callahan's stolen daughter found. 2 names, 2 histories, 1 body. I didn't know yet which name I would go by. I didn't know what any of it would look like a year from now. I didn't know how to think about 31 years of a life built on a stolen foundation, or what to do with the anger, or how to grieve the childhood that was taken from me without spiraling into it. But I knew this. I had a father who had kept every birthday card. I had a grandmother who had quietly built me a lifeline. I had an aunt who cooked for 30 people when she was nervous about how to love someone she'd never met. And I had somewhere in the legal machinery now, slowly grinding forward in Columbus, a measure of accountability that no amount of money or real estate or social position had managed to prevent. My father's trial is scheduled for late fall. His attorneys have entered a not guilty plea, which I expected. Leonard Sherwood has spent his entire life believing that enough money and enough control could manage any situation. He's about to find out that some situations can't be managed. I still drive the Honda with the cracked mirror. I haven't touched the trust money yet. Not because I don't need it, but because I'm not ready to figure out what it means. What I want my life to look like when I'm not just surviving it. That's new territory for me. I go to Portland once a month now. Robert is teaching me to fish, which I'm spectacularly bad at. Deborah sends me recipes even though I've told her I can barely boil water. Penny has now drooled on every pair of pants I own. I told Robert once, on the phone late at night, that I felt guilty for not being able to just be happy, that I'd found him, that the truth had come out, that things had resolved in the way you'd want them to, and I still woke up some mornings feeling like the ground wasn't quite solid. He was quiet for a moment. Fiona, he said, and that name in his mouth still stops me every time, like a hand on my shoulder. You spent 31 years being told you are worth much. That doesn't fix itself in a few months. You don't owe anyone a neat recovery. I didn't say anything for a while. Robert, I said finally. Yeah? Thank you for not giving up. He made a sound that wasn't quite words. Then, thank you for being findable. I'm still Ivy at work. My colleagues know something significant happened in my life this year, but I haven't explained all of it. I'm a private person. I always have been. That's what happens when you grow up in a house where nothing you said was received with care. You learn to hold yourself close. But I'm learning to open up slowly, to Robert, to Deborah, to my therapist, who I started seeing in May and who has been more useful than I expected. Some nights I still get it wrong. Some nights I still operate from the old place. The place that assumes I'm the problem, that I need to make myself smaller, that I shouldn't want too much. 31 years of that wiring doesn't just disappear. But then Robert calls. Or Penny appears on a video call with a shoe in her mouth. Or I remember my grandmother's letter, the words I've memorized now. The ones I come back to when I'm not sure I'm standing on solid ground. Whatever the truth turns out to be. I want you to be free. I don't know yet what Fiona Callahan looks like, fully. I'm still building her. But I know she's allowed to take up space. I know she has people who fought for her before she even knew she needed fighting for. I know that the life she was supposed to have was stolen from her, but the life she has built with her own hands. The apartment, the cat, the Honda, the patients at St. Luke's who grab her fingers, is real, and it's hers. And no one can take that back. It's not the life I was supposed to have, but it's the one I'm walking into with my eyes open. For the first time in 31 years, I think that's enough. I've thought a lot about what actually made Leonard Sherwood the way he was. Not to excuse him. There is no excusing 31 years of deliberate cruelty toward a child he knew was not his. A child who had been stolen from someone else. A child who called him dad and got nothing back but contempt. But I've thought about it because understanding how a person becomes capable of that is the only way I know to make sure I don't carry any of it forward with me. Here's what I keep coming back to. He chose. Every single day, for 31 years, he made a choice. He could have told the truth at any point. He could have found Robert. He could have treated me with basic human decency even while keeping the secret. Instead, he chose to punish me for existing. He chose to make me feel like the problem, like the deficiency, like the one who didn't belong. Because if I ever started asking real questions, if I ever felt entitled to answers, the whole thing might unravel. So he made sure I never felt entitled to anything. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. The cruelty wasn't random, it was strategic. It was how he managed his own fear. And the terrible clarifying thing about understanding that is realizing it was never about me. Not once. I was never a disappointing daughter. I was a liability he was trying to suppress. Every cold look, every dismissal, every "don't be dramatic, Ivy." That was a man protecting himself, not evaluating me. I spent 31 years absorbing someone else's fear as though it were my own failure. My grandmother Loretta understood something, even without the full picture. She saw a child being wronged, and she spent 5 years quietly doing what she could about it. She didn't have the power to reveal the truth herself, or maybe she didn't know enough to name it clearly, but she had the wisdom to act anyway, within the limits of what she could do. She built that trust. She kept that photograph. She wrote that letter. She chose, in her own quiet way, to refuse to do nothing. That kind of moral intelligence. The kind that sees an injustice and acts on it even when the action is small and private and might never be recognized. That's something I want to grow toward. Not the dramatic gesture, not the confrontation, but the steady, unglamorous work of doing right by someone when it costs you something. Robert did that for 31 years. He kept searching when every practical argument said to stop. He bought birthday cards for a daughter he couldn't find. He sat in Patricia's office and shook and didn't know what to say and showed up anyway. That kind of persistence. Not the loud grinding, teeth-clenched kind, but the quiet refusal to accept a world where his daughter simply didn't exist anymore. That is something I'm still learning to apply to my own life. To the parts of myself I gave up on. To the things I stopped wanting because wanting them felt like too much of a risk. I'm 31 years old and I'm learning, slowly, that I'm allowed to want things. That wanting doesn't make you weak or ungrateful or dramatic. That the people who told me to need less were protecting their own interests, not my growth. The truth came out because it always does. Not through magic, not through punishment descending from the sky, but through the patient, relentless accumulation of evidence, a DNA database, a careful investigator, a grandmother who kept a photograph in a locked box. Actions have trajectories. Leonard's choices had been building toward consequence for 3 decades, and no amount of money or control could permanently redirect that trajectory. I'm not waiting for Leonard's trial to feel free. I already do.